in terms of good days, what is the best day you've ever had?
Well, there was a day that my dad and I went out and we found 33. Found 33 in a day.
Was that off his farm? The home farm there?
That was off his farm. That was the year where there was, I should have prefaced the story earlier about the chisel pod field, because the year before that, there was a bean field, a 40-acre bean field around his farm where the farmer didn't take the beans out until December, the second week of December. So a lot of those beans, even the pick beans, there's still a lot of food there. So it was bringing a lot of deer, and a lot of them were just congregating right there on the field edges there at his farm. And that's why there was so many that year. But yep, we found 40 on his farm that year, and 33 of them were on one day.
Lights, camera,
follow the trail.
Ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera.
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
So we have Emmitt here. And so Emmitt, it's been probably about a year exactly since we last talked or crossed paths. You are a former guest of Whitetail Cribs, and I personally watch a lot of your shed hunting videos on YouTube, and it's shed season, man. It is time. I imagine this is like the peak rut for whitetail hunters, and like this is peak shed season. Would you agree with that?
100%. Yeah. I think we're really starting to get to that climax. I would consider like November 7th, peak rut. And yep. I'd say like March 1st is kind of where it really starts to get amped up here. Well, and I assume everywhere else in the Midwest.
Yeah. So for everyone who doesn't know who you are, take a quick second to introduce yourself, and then we'll talk all about sheds.
Well, my name is Emmitt Enyeart. I am a 26-year-old that lives here in Southeast Iowa. I work as a operations engineer here in Burlington, Iowa. I've always had a passion for whitetail hunting, and basically within the past 5 years, I've really grown a strong interest in shed hunting. And, when it comes this time of year, that's really all I do when I have free time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's definitely apparent in the amount of sheds you just find overall. And anyone that finds that many sheds clearly just walks a ton of miles. You can't do that 100%. Otherwise. So I think some people think like, oh man, you must be lucky, but I bet you walk probably more miles than 98% of people. So real quick, I know we kind of were breaking down how many sheds you found in the past. Break down that last, 4 years shed hunting history of just your tabulations on finds.
So out of the past 4 years, in 2018, we found 83 sheds. Now this is including what my dad and myself find together, because we just kind of total them up at the end. So 2018, we had about 83 sheds. 2019, we had a really good year with 102 sheds. And then in 2020, it almost cut the number of sheds in half at 51, wow, which was a shocking year. And then last year, we had our best year yet. And that almost went to 3 times what we had in 2020 at 143 sheds.
Wow. What happened in 2020?
That's a great question. I'm trying to remember back on what exactly it was. I felt like we were hitting a lot of the farms at the wrong times. I felt like we continually would go to a farm that had already been hit. When I say hit, somebody else had already shed hunted it before me. It was just like the wrong sequence of how we went about it. Seemed like there was a lot of times we'd go there, there'd already be footprints, and more or less that kind of is what we found. Also, some of the farms that had always been really good for us, there was some other like external circumstances. For example, in 2019, when we had 102 sheds on my dad's farm alone, because my dad has a 120-acre tract, on his farm alone, we found, I want to say it was around 40 sheds that year on his farm. And so that had a giant portion of the 2019 count. But then in 2020, all the fields around him, all the food sources for the deer were chisel plowed. So the count on his farm dropped from 40 to, I want to say it was around 19 or 18. It was 18.
Wow. It's crazy
so
how
that
much.
Was a big impact.
Yeah, it's crazy how much farming practices can impact your hunting and shed hunting opportunities, and if they decide to chisel plow or not. So that's pretty impressive. So then in 2021, I guess, going from 51 to 143, was that a mixture of getting access to more farms or just covering more ground, or a mixture of both?
Actually, it was gaining access to more farms, and basically, like you said, both. There was more miles walked. I didn't count how many miles I walked in 2021 because in 2020, I had an Apple Watch with me. So I had a real good idea of exactly how many miles I walked. In 2021, I had a pretty good estimate, but I wasn't as accurate as in 2020. But anyways, I gained a lot more access to a bunch more farms for 2021. And that ultimately is what helped me, get that number to almost 3 times.
Yeah. So we'll dive into this later because I have some questions about getting access for shed hunting. But I want to ask for someone that is listening to this that maybe are watching this and they are brand new to shed hunting. They've never found a shed antler. And this is life or death situation. They have to go find a shed antler in one day. What are some tips that you're going to tell this person to go find their first shed antler? They don't know anything about it. Like they have come across some content. They want to go find one and they have no clue. So what would you tell that person?
Yeah, depending on how novice they are, I would probably break it down and say wherever there's food, as far as, standing corn, if there's any standing beans that they know about in an area, or wherever they're seeing deer that time of year, and wherever the next closest patch of timber or cover would be, to go start looking there.
Okay.
Essentially the most generic breakdown you can have for it is the sheds are going to be right at the food where the deer want to be, right at their best bedding where they want to be, or in between, right? Assuming that they know what a good food source is, which is, standing or corn, beans, turnips, if you have food plots. And, if you have a really hard winter, like we did in 2021, sometimes what you can see is these deer will start hitting locust pods. Those are typically like what we'll see here in Southeast Iowa and overgrown pastures that have grown up, old cow pastures. We'll see that those have not only good thermal cover for deer, but they also have those locust pods. And so it kind of provides both a food source and a bedding area for deer. And that's one of the reasons I think those are some of the best areas to shed hunt.
Interesting. Okay. So, in the power rule of 80-20, so are you trying to spend 80% of your time in those areas versus, because I find myself wandering around in my shed because I end up scouting most of the time. So are you like, I am shed hunting and I'm hitting these, where I'm going to find 80% of my antlers and 20% of the area, like sticking to that?
I guess, what do you mean?
So like I assume 80% of the antlers you find are in 20% of the areas, meaning like food or bedding. So is that where you pretty much solely focus and you're not really messing around with the transition areas as much?
Boy, that's a good question. It really kind of depends on what the farm has to offer, the specific farm. Man, that is a loaded question. I would say if I was running out of time or whatnot, obviously I'm going to go to that 20% areas. Yeah, that 20% area. If I'm scouting a new farm, or if it's a new farm that I think I have the potential to get permission to bow hunt, I'm definitely hitting it all, covering everything. And then the farms that I have history with, or I know of certain deer that are in an area and I have an idea of what they're doing, I will cover those to a T. I will grid search them. Man, that is a good question. I hope that answered it.
I think you kind of illustrated in the sense of like, when there's a big deer in the area, you're familiar with the spot, like you're going to leave no leaf unturned. But when you're walking a brand new farm, I feel like anyone naturally can hit the hot spots. And then if you're finding some, maybe you work backwards. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So I think that's, hopefully someone that maybe has never found their shed antler, now they're going to go look for the food sources or go look for the bedding area. So break down what bedding areas may look like at this time of year for someone that doesn't know. Is it where you can find some red cedars or some conifers for thermal cover? Because I think those spots could definitely become a hot spot. So any additional information on looking for bedding areas for late season?
So the first tip, and I'm sure that this one's been beat to death, but it's south-facing slopes, right? And the reason south-facing slopes are great is because the sun rises in the east and then it sets in the west. And so the sun concentrates most of its time in the day hitting the areas that are facing to the south. So like when you go out after it snows, you'll see on like north-facing slopes, there's a lot of snow still there. Actually, we just went into an open timber farm this past weekend and you could see the whole north-facing slope. It hasn't snowed in 2 weeks. The whole north-facing slope was covered in snow. The south-facing slope was like it was perfectly clear. Mm-hmm. So whether it's open timber or a cedar thicket, south-facing slopes are always going to be your best friend because that's where the deer is going to want to lay for majority of the day. Now, if you get to pick between a cedar thicket or open timber, I've always liked the cedar thickets, but there's a couple things that have to happen, or there's a couple things within the cedar thicket that are good. And I guess what I'm trying to say is there's some cedar thickets that are good and there's some cedar thickets that are bad. So some are like, their cedars are just absolutely surrounded everywhere. You got thorns, multiflora rose. I mean, if you're having a horrible time getting through it and it's like absolutely it's almost like a barrier for you to walk through it. It's going to be the same thing for a deer. And just like anything else, deer are going to want to take the path of least resistance. But there are some really good cedar thickets where you have native grass and cedars. Another thing is the maturity of the cedars. It's like it always seems like when I'm shed hunting, the cedar thickets that are the best are when the cedars are like 10 feet tall and they're spaced out sporadically. They're not overwhelmed where they feel like they're kind of, what's the word?
Barricaded in there, basically.
Barricaded.
Like you can't see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. They don't feel claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And they kind of have that little space, but they get those cedars that can block the wind. And if you get one of those on a south-facing slope,
that's money.
That's money.
That's money. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that's good advice because I think for most people across the country, they can probably relate to either locust. They can relate to row crops being corner beans standing. They can relate to hopefully locust pods. And those are those like banana, real skinny looking banana pods. If you don't know what those are, the trees with all the thorns on them. And then obviously the red cedars are prickly Christmas trees. It's kind of what the breakdown of that is. So this is kind of a fun question before we get too far into the shed hunting tips. So I know you are an avid hunter as well and shoot some really impressive deer. So, but I also know you love shed hunting. So you have 10 days to hunt. So I'm saying 10 days to hunt for the entire year. How many are you allocating with a bow in your hand in November versus actually walking for sheds? You only get 10 days, so you get to pick wisely.
No, this is a great question because this is a question that I'm always battling. I get 2 weeks vacation, actually 3 weeks vacation. And so as the years have gone on, I've always allocated 2 weeks for the rut. Like that is my go-to. I'm bow in hand so for your question, 7 hours out of 10 hours have always been for bow hunting. And then I leave the other 3 hours or the other 3 days for family or whatever. I haven't really ever used vacation for shed hunting. It's very special circumstances, but the past 2 years, that's kind of started to change. And like just yesterday, I took a day of vacation to go shed hunting, and I'm taking a vacation next week. We're going to go shed hunting. Yeah. What I would say, Jake, is if you asked me that question probably 3 years ago, I would say all 10 days I'm going bow hunting. Right now, I'm saying I'm going bow hunting 6 days and I'm shed hunting 4.
Wow. So is it just because, what do you love about shed hunting? Is it just the actual Easter egg hunt of finding antlers, like the adrenaline rush of like, oh my gosh, I see an antler. I see a tine sticking up. I don't know how big it is. And you're up like, oh my gosh, what gets your shed angler engine rolling?
I think you described it great right there. That's a great reason on why I like it. It's just that, every time you find one, it's that adrenaline rush. Like, oh yes, there's another one. But it's also, it's rewarding, and I'm almost in a way where I feel like I have a little bit more control on it. So some, deer are very unpredictable. They're all, if we knew exactly how to hunt a specific deer, we probably wouldn't do it. That's what keeps us going at it. With shed hunting, there's an equation that, if you do put the time in and you put the miles in and you stay focused at it, I mean, you're going to reap the rewards. There's some guys that'll go out there every year and grind in a tree stand and, just by unfortunate luck, just did not have didn't get the opportunity that they were after. And, shed hunting, it's more of I wouldn't say guaranteed success, but
the more you walk, the more anglers you're going to find.
Favor.
Yeah.
You're putting the odds in your favor.
Sure. That makes sense. Okay. Well, that's fun. I just wanted to get an idea, and I wanted people to get an idea how much you really enjoy shed hunting, because I think most people are like, what? You burn a vacation day to go shed angler? Look for antlers. But I mean, to each their own. And man, it is fun, like you said. So, like with a guy that has found basically, hundreds and hundreds of antlers now up to this point, I want to ask some tips. So you've definitely figured some things out that maybe some people haven't. And so I guess breaking down, I watched one of your videos here recently in terms of like breaking down the key tips of shed hunting. And this is maybe 101 for some people, but I think some people will need the refresher. So I'm waking up, it's Saturday morning, I'm going shed hunting. What direction should I be walking these farms in relation to the sun? Absolutely with the sun at your back. You always want your shadow in front of you and you want the sun at your back. That's where you're going to have the best, most clear picture of the woods. Just keep, a better way of saying it is either A, keep the sun at your back, or B, just keep your shadow in front of you. Keep your shadow in front of you. Or C, wait till a cloudy day. And that can be some of your best options too. Yes. How much more success do you find when you're doing that or on a cloudy day versus a bluebird sunny spring day? To give you an exact, or to give you like a statistical breakdown, but roughly, no. I mean, I would say that I'm probably finding 3 to 2. 3 to 2. I mean, if I'm walking, That's a
Because
lot.
I'm
That's
able to
one and a
cover the
half.
ground faster.
Yeah. So okay. So this question I have. So when you're walking, I'm sure it's, terrain dependent, in an hour, how many miles are you walking? Like what's your 1 hour mile pace? Or what's your minute pace? I guess people probably like, are you walking 20 minutes a mile, 25 minutes, 15?
I would say, if there's snow on the ground and I do a 10-hour day or an 8-hour day, I would say I'm probably doing a mile every 45 minutes if there's snow on the ground and, it's a little bit harder walking. Let me think that through, though. Trying to do the math in my head.
What about no snow?
No snow. If I'm a man on the mission that day and I'm just trying to really hit the good areas and not trying to be very, very meticulous about it, I would say I can do I've done up to 20 miles a day, which I don't recommend doing. And when I say in a day, it's typically 10 hours. 10 hours is probably about the most that I would go out for in a day.
Mm-hmm. So what about, like, I guess when we go next week, how many miles do you think we could expect to walk? And and the reason I ask this, because sometimes I think I go too fast and I'm not paying attention. I'm just like, I'm just walking. I forget what I'm doing. I'm shed hunting. And I think, do you think people walk too fast on average, or are you like
absolutely.
real slow?
100%.
Okay.
Sorry, that doesn't answer your question. I think some people very much do walk too fast. I think some people get too caught up in looking in the weeds and they're moving too slow. And I think it's finding that right balance. I would say next week when you come out, I bet we're probably going to walk we would probably walk 12 to 15 miles that day.
Okay. So that's a pretty good
10
day.
to 15.
Yeah. That's a pretty good day. I think my record is like 20 miles in one day too. And I found 2 antlers. I was like, well, this is not a very good average here. Not only did I cover a lot of ground, I didn't find many antlers. Do you have days like that?
100%. I mean, I just had a really long day. Was it 2 weekends ago? And walked away with a spike. And it was a 10-hour day. I walked away with a spike. It was, I don't know. In those certain scenarios, I mean, I think to myself, I'm that much closer to another shed. Okay. I just had my bad day. My good day's coming.
And so in terms of good days, what is the best day you've ever had?
Well, there was a day that my dad and I went out and we found 33. Found 33 in a day. Was that off his farm? The home farm there? That was off his farm. That was the year where there was, I should have prefaced the story earlier about the chisel pod field, because the year before that, there was a bean field, a 40-acre bean field around his farm where the farmer didn't take the beans out until December, the second week of December.
Oh, geez.
So a lot of those beans, even the pick beans, there's still a lot of food there. So it was bringing a lot of deer, and a lot of them were just congregating right there on the field edges there at his farm. And that's why there was so many that year. But yep, we found 40 on his farm that year, and 33 of them were on one day.
That's crazy. That's what shed hunters dream of. That's some mecca numbers there.
It's just ridiculous.
That's crazy. So I guess to reiterate for everyone, in the mornings you want to walk east to west or keep the shadow in front of you, and then in the evenings you get off work early, or you sneak away in the evening. You want to go west to east. Is that correct for evening shed hunts?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you best case scenario, I mean, that's what you're doing. You're keeping the sun at your back. The sun's, yep, you said it perfectly.
Okay. And then, that 3 to 2 1 ratio, or 3 to 2 ratio, is what you kind of feel bluebird day versus a cloudy, crappy day, like a kind of a drizzly day.
Yeah. Because if I'm looking in, let's say, like a farm that has a lot of open timber, I'm able to cover a lot more ground, or at least scan areas more. I can look probably 20 yards out in front of me when it's a cloudy day and the colors of the woods are all pretty equal. But if it's a sunny day, I'm starting to hone my search in more in like within 10 yards. So I'm covering things more. So I'm not walking as much ground. And then ultimately I'm not finding as many sheds. also sunny days, I swear they burn my battery faster. It's like like when I walk, if I end up walking into the sun, it's like my eyes start squinting. My eyes are, it's like, I don't know. I think the cloudy days.
It kind of makes sense. Yeah. Like you're straining your eyes and you're extra focus. And then I feel that maybe everything looks like a shiny tine a lot more than a dark day where it's like, is that a stick or is that an antler? Which which kind of leads into the next thing, or like one of the other things. How well is your eye trained at this point in comparison to when you started like 4 or 5 years ago, like really honing in shed hunting?
Oh, I don't know if I can even quantify that. I question sometimes if it hasn't gotten worse. I found out I needed glasses this year. So I'm like, wow, is this with me a game changer? I put glasses on. Maybe I can now see more sheds.
You're going to get to 200 real quick once you put on glasses.
Yeah, double it. But no, I don't know, Jake. That's a good question. I don't think I can quantify that, to be honest with you, because it seems like at the beginning of every year, I do like to take like a decoy shed out. I like to take a shed that I found in previous years, something that's not like a spike size, but something that's a little bit bigger that I'll throw out in front of me, without looking where it lays, and then basically turn around and try to find it. And by doing that, you can really start to realize, okay, this is what it's going to look like. This is what I need to be looking for. It's really beneficial at the beginning of the year, but like up to this point in the year, for this season, I mean, I'm not doing it anymore, but I find that being very helpful for myself. And so basically what I'm saying is I have to retrain my eyes every year. Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense. And one thing that I on that tip video that you did was figuring out the pace that you need to walk to. Like when you throw that decoy out and you're like, whoa, like that was really hard for me to find. I need to slow down versus like, okay, it's stuck out like a sore thumb. I can cover a lot of ground real quick. That was a good piece of advice. It's a good piece of advice. I walked yesterday, snuck out just a little bit to try to find some antlers. I walked one farm, found 0. And then I went and I walked behind my house and found a match set, this kind of like in the back of the barnyard, which is pretty cool because I didn't really anticipate to find one there. But so let's run through a scenario. You find one antler. What is your strategy of finding the match set? Like, do you do circles? What's your strategy?
So, I mean, first off, I'm marking it on a map using, I use HuntStand, but whatever app you're using, I mark it, get an exact location of where you're at. And I also really like taking that tracking feature, especially in that kind of scenario. I know some people don't want to run a tracker or a tracer all day, but at that point, if you find a shed that you want to find the other shed off of or the other side, you're now going to want to know exactly where you have walked. And so you're going to turn on your tracer, you're going to see exactly where your path is. And you can do circles, or you can start hitting the beaten paths that are the immediate paths that are right there, and go back and do circles. But ultimately, if it's one that you really want to find the other side to, you've got to grid search it at that point. I mean, when I say grid search it, you could do it north to west, or north to south, east to west, whatever it is for your preference, or doing it circles. I found my biggest match set yesterday.
And, I've seen that.
No, time out.
On Instagram, you post those?
Yeah, it was awesome. I best vacation day I've had in a long time, because I was like, wow, this was totally worth it. But I found the first one, and it was like my dad was with me, and it was like, okay, this one's right here. Had all the mapping up on the app. And basically what we did is we both knew exactly where that shed was. And we started taking the good paths, the well-beaten paths that are right there. And once we hit those, we started to recheck areas that we had already looked. Now, this is where it comes up to an interesting part, is my dad had actually walked within 10 yards of the second side. But when he came up to it, he went like, just how the way that the ground looked, there was a tall fence right there, and he's like, deer's not going to jump that. So he and there was multiflora rows, so he went around it and was looking the other way, back away from the sun. And reasonably so. I mean, as you're moving, that's typically not where you're going to, based on what was on in the other direction, I understand why he did that. And, but we knew that there was already a big shed in that area. So we were going back and being extremely thorough at this point. And basically started going, what would have been east to east to west, and going, 20 yards back, forth. And eventually I came up on it and there laid another shed. And it was probably 100 yards from the first one, but it wasn't in the most immediately obvious spot.
So that looked like you were in somewhat of a timber tract too. So, I mean, break down where you found this. Was that a bedding area or transition to food?
No, it's actually an amazing spot. It's a little bit more, I wouldn't say open timber, but what it is the neighbor to that farm had a substantial amount of food, had some standing corn. And basically this draw that we were in, it bordered up to that, and it was a south facing slope with it. So basically any of the deer that were immediately hitting that food, that's going to be their first spot where they'd want to go. It was the first south facing slope off of that food source that they wanted. And because it was a little bit thicker than open timber, it had some undergrowth. It was a pretty good bedding area for those deer. I mean, it wasn't like your dream bedding area, but it was definitely something that most deer weren't going to pass up. And so it made sense.
Yeah. I mean, it was close to food, decent cover, and, fit the bill. Exactly.
And it, to me, it makes sense that a set of sheds like that were in that area, because I'm always overthinking these kind of things. And I think that deer was probably like the king of his area. And he's going to get the first dib. They're territorial animals, and he's going to get the first dibs on where he wants. And that's his, that's the A+ spot, because he's got his food within 100 yards, and then he's got his perfect bedding right there. So, I mean, we were taking basically the fruits of the neighbor's labor, but that's just the nature of how it works. The neighbor has the food.
You have the bedding
that we were shed hunting had the bedding, and it happened to be that we were lucky that he dropped them there.
Interesting. So on average, which I know there's not a shoebox answer here, but how often do you find match sheds that are like within that 100-yard zone, or they're like usually 25-yard zone? If you had to boil it down, 15?
No, it's a great question, because actually I really wanted to do like a legitimate breakdown of how close
like how often
I found is.
I
think sometimes I'd say on average the match sets that I find are probably, I'd say 75% of them are within 100. Wait, so you said within 100 yards, right? That was your question?
Yep. That was the benchmark I used, because that's what the big one you just found there was like that. Would you say 75% are within 100?
I would say 75% are within 150 yards as the crow flies that I find. But the weird part is sometimes it doesn't seem like 150 yards until you actually like put the, the 2 pins on the app, because, you'll, like, we just found a match set at my dad's farm this past weekend. It was like, we found it 2 hours apart, but as the crow flies, they were 125 yards apart. But just the way that we were searching the ground, it didn't come up for 2 hours. So sometimes it might seem like it's a lot farther, but you actually look at it and say, oh no, it's really.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. I look forward. You should do that breakdown, because I think a lot of people would find value in that, because it's like, man, all right, I really want to find this other side and have some sort of data to not feel like you're crazy when you're getting to that 150-yard mark. You're like, man, is it a lost cause? No, that's really good. So one other question in terms of these like shed hunting days. So when you're taking an entire day, I mean, most people pack a lunch when they're going for an all-day sit. So I assume, what are some tips and tricks of making the most out of your full shed hunting day when you're burning a vacation day, which is super valuable?
Absolutely. Great question. So by all means, pack water, food, and drink. When I say food, I mean like, sandwiches, energy bars, and snacks that can keep you energized throughout the day, because it doesn't take long to lose that energy when you're out there walking. At first 2 hours, 3 hours, especially if you're not finding much, if anything, it starts to get really draining. And so that's why I've always got my backpack packed with food. It's like, so it helps me stay mentally focused.
Sure.
And Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, I think that's a great thing where people are like, man, you got to pack snacks to shed hunt. But like, it seems I'm sure it can be, make you stay a little bit longer or walk over that next ridge or hit that next spot versus kind of petering out for the day. One question I have for you: do you listen to music or podcasts or anything when you're walking, or are you a no headphones guy to straight shed hunting?
Man, Jake, I've so thought about doing that recently. I'm like, I should just bring my AirPods and like listen to something on this, whether it's a podcast or music or whatever it is, But no, I've never done that, and I've always thought that'd be cool, like. Do you know of anybody that has done that? Because I've not seen anybody done that, but
sometimes I'll throw in my headphones and shed hunt while I'm kind of going. I don't know if it makes me less effective at it. I don't know, but it's, it kind of becomes a walk in the park, I guess. You're just listening to a podcast and catching up on some shows I enjoy. So I didn't know if you were someone that did that every time, but if it sounds like you're just fully focused on finding sheds.
Well, I guess what I'll have to do for the rest of the year is I'm going to have to take my AirPods, listen to Jake here on Exodus. And if I don't, if I find less, I won't be doing it next year. But if I find, it'll be a tradition. Awesome.
Well, yeah, I think you need to do a little split testing here and see what you find out. So another thing that I think is was noteworthy, where everyone wants to find that like 80-inch typical side just sitting out there in like the middle of a clover field or like in standing beans. But you mentioned like looking small to find big. Like it's the same thought of like aim small, miss small. So right. How important is that to you in your opinion, of like finding a lot of shedding antlers? Are you just looking for like, okay, I'm looking for a brow tine, I'm looking for anything that looks like an antler versus looking for a full antler?
Yeah, it's normally I like to look for, tines together. Normally that's like a good indicator, or where I like color. If you have a cloudy day, I love looking color. I know some people don't really even mention that much, but another thing that I think really stands out is when the beam curls. Like if you can see the beam curl, that's always a telltale sign. That's always what tricks me too. If you get some limb that's laying on the ground, that's happens to everybody. But yes, looking small can be very, very beneficial. Keeping your sights narrow. And I know when I did that video, what I should have specified more on is like how far out in front should you look?
Yeah.
It's hard to answer that question though, because it depends on day by day. Because if you have a cloudy day, I feel like I can look out further. I'm more comfortable to look out further. Like 20
what's
yards.
further? Okay, 20 yards.
20 yards. I'd look 20 yards out in front of me, and unless the contour of the ground isn't right or there's a lot of undergrowth, I would say I can cover open timber 20 yards from me on a cloudy day. But if I have a sunny day, there's shadows and everything, I really got to hone that into like 5 to 10 yards.
Okay.
And just like the other day, the reason that I find that tip so beneficial is because if you're looking for those small ones, there are some big ones that sometimes just the way they're laying with the sun and how it's hitting it might not be so obvious as obvious as you think. And so if you're like constantly focusing your search on for those smaller ones, there's a little section of that big one that stands out, and you'll be able to pick up on those things more. Like the other day I was walking and I walked past the cedar, and there was a pretty nice one. Likely I would say it was off 110-inch, 120-inch deer. It was laying right behind the cedar, time's up. I mean, it would have been easy if I was coming from the other way, but because I was like keeping my vision nice and tight, I picked it up out of the corner of my eye. But in a way, I feel like I got lucky. But if I was just scanning like 30 yards out ahead of me, I mean, I would have walked within 2 yards of that shed and probably been long gone.
It's the game of inches, just like anything else here. That's fun.
Scariest thing.
So one thing that I've noticed, and obviously, like when you took your shed hunting game to the next level, in a lot of ways, you said it was getting access to more farms. What advice can you give people that maybe they want to go shed hunting and they only have like maybe 1 or 2 farms to hunt? I mean, I know you hunt a ton of different spots. Like you would hunt you would hunt public parks, you would hunt like everything, and ammunition.
Absolutely.
I mean, so like that right there, I think shows some level of determination that most people aren't probably willing to do or think about. But let's say someone's like, well, I've been trying to get the courage to go ask that farmer if I can go walk his farm. How do you phrase that? Or what are some key talking points and what are some things you would never want to mention?
So first off, it's be polite. You treat the people with the utmost respect. I've knocked on a lot of doors. I've had some people that have been pretty, very respectful and said no. And they're like, hey, but come on in. I'll show you what I found over the years. And I love those. I went to go ask the shed hunt. I get to go basically have a little Whitetail Cribs episode of my own in somebody's house, So, but anyways, it's always be polite, treat the people with respect, because you don't know the people that even say no. You can always go back and ask again, or they might direct you to somebody else. They'll say, hey, I like to do it here, but I know Joe down the block, it would likely be willing to. That's always a very, very big thing. Another thing that I like to do that, I don't think a lot of people think of is you'll have some landowners that immediately hear the word hunt, and that's like a red flag to them. So sometimes what I like to term it as is I'll ask them politely. I'll say, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, would you mind if I go out and look for deer antlers on your farm? And now you've taken that word hunt out of it. So that red flag doesn't stand up. And sometimes you find that it works. And actually some of the best farms I have to shed hunt are sanctuaries where they don't let people hunt. And I sometimes feel like I've gotten permission on those solely because I asked like that. If I would have went up and asked to shed hunt, that would have been immediately like, no, we don't let any hunting. Another thing is if you don't be discouraged if you get told no. I mean, it's a competitive world. This hobby is growing. Shed hunting is growing. A lot of people are starting to do the same thing by knocking on doors, and you're going to knock on a lot of doors and a lot of people are going to say no. And you might go a whole day or two of knocking on a list full of doors with no's, but if you keep putting the time at it, you'll find your yeses here and there.
Mm-hmm. So how often, let's say someone says, no, I don't know about that. Do you try to hard sell them? Like, well, I'll just only be in and out in a couple hours, or like, or do you just take it as like, okay, well, I respect that. Here's my name and number.
I typically, I normally don't try to hard sell it. If there's times that if they answer like that, where they're like, I don't know, I might try to see what their concerns are and try to, see if I can provide a solution for that. But I don't typically, try to
twist their arm for sure.
I do think though that if you go, I think one thing that people overlook is, and I don't do this too much, is going back and asking a second time. If somebody says no one year, but you're extremely respectful and polite, but you have the initiative to go back and ask, a year or two later, you've now built a little bit more PR with that landowner, and you're luckily, you don't know what can happen. Mm-hmm. There might be a change of heart, or
that's something you do often or not very often at this point?
I have not done very often, but I have heard that is a successful tactic.
Okay.
I can't say from personal experience though.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense. And realistically, I don't know how often landowners really get random people showing up to their doorstep in March to go look for antlers. There might only be 2 or 3 people. By then you're a familiar face.
Yes, exactly. It's funny that the number of landowners ask me like, how did you get my name and number, or how did you get my name and address? It's like, I got the plat book and yeah.
See, that's interesting you say that, because I always say plat book too. I don't want to say, well, there's this app I pay for that tells you exactly where you live. It's like that generation, I think, understands plat book so much better versus saying that, I can just Google your name and call you on your cell phone if you really want. I know that people don't feel real comfortable when you tell them that.
Absolutely. And plat book sometimes I think reverts them back to, you might seem more local.
Sure.
As opposed to if you're like, hey, I'm Jake from Ohio, or I'm Jake from Illinois, and I'm over here in Kansas wanting to shed hunt, they're going to be like, I have no problem telling this guy no, I'll never see him again.
Yeah. Yep, that's a good point. Yeah, so using the plat book, and I mean, I do have a plat book and I'm on my shelf over here, so I really do have.
Yeah, nice. So you actually do.
Yeah. So, no, that's fun. Okay, so now some of these other kind of off the wall spots where you go to look. How did you go? And I don't want you to give away any of your trade secrets here, but how did you go about figuring out that you could go on there for certain days? You reach out to HR. Was it a contact of a contact? How does that work?
That was actually my dad had a contact that had hunted in there. And so there's an application process. And so basically I found out through my dad. It was just kind of like word of mouth, one person to the next. And ultimately that's how I found out about it. And it's just it's a great opportunity where you have to get in there to hunt. And then they offer 2 days of shed hunting.
Interesting. So it's kind of a site specific hunting permission deal where you put in, and then as a bonus, you get to go shed hunting for 2 days. They open it up basically. Exactly. See, that's pretty unique because I think most people are like, "Oh, I would never hunt there," and they wouldn't go about putting in an application. But someone like you, how many times have you ever even hunted that, or are you just going to shed hunt it?
Oh, I've hunted that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I've hunted in there. It's the only difficult part about in there is because it's a federal facility. They don't allow video cameras.
Okay.
So essentially, I don't like to do much of my hunting in there, or as much hunting in there as I like to do outside, just because you can't film in there.
Sure.
So
yeah.
That experience. I like doing the filming, and so
yeah, you like documenting everything.
Exactly. With the shed, it's like I don't film them.
Yeah. Interesting. So when you're going through and making a list to go get permission for parcels, are you going in prospecting during the work week and then like, okay, Saturday, I'm going to go try to get some permission, and you just go through this list and you have it kind of planned out, or is it more sporadic?
Oh, no. So what I do with that is I'll go through the app and basically find all the property information, mailing address, and I'll break it down. I'll go through like a whole county is what I'll do is I'll break it down by county, and I'll go from north to south. I'll find all the farms that I think look legitimate for hunting, and I miss a lot, but there's like, okay, these ones all look really good. I'll take a little bit of notes on them, put the mailing addresses in, and then what I'll end up doing is I'll going back and saying, okay, I've got 20 addresses in this city. I'll put it through a route planner. And so I can optimize my time. And then so on a Saturday or a Sunday, and I really like cold, snowy days. I love January for this because people are inside. They're not wanting to go out, and that's my time to shine because I can optimize my time, and I'll have a whole route planned out of start here on this side of the county and go to this side, or this side of this city and go to this side of the city, and I'll cover 20 houses in 4 hours.
Wow.
Now 10 people might be home, but if you try to do it, I mean, that's how I do it. I'm trying to be as efficient as possible. But
that's good advice. I was thinking in my mind, like, there's got to be a tool out there, because I picture myself like making some crappy spreadsheet and like trying to figure out what's the best route. But I guess there's a tool for that. That's good advice.
Yeah, it's like a route planner, Excel, something like that. You can put in like 25 addresses. So you basically put together your spreadsheet, or you can pay for it, and you can do unlimited addresses. But yeah, you just build your little spreadsheet and you just copy and paste the addresses in.
It's cool.
And then we'll.
So the houses where no one's there, are you leaving a note or anything, or are you just like, try again next time?
Later?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Come back later.
Interesting. So when you're asking for permission on these shed hunting parcels, are you trying to just get permission to shed antler, or like, are you saying like, well, I was hoping I could hunt this, and then like, okay, well, can I shed hunt it? Or is it the absolute opposite where you're like, can I go look for antlers, see how it goes? Like, oh my gosh, it's tore up in there, I would really love to hunt that. And you go back and revisit, like, oh, I found a couple here.
So no, very circumstantial answer. I read the landowner more or less. If they seem like they would be open to bow hunting, like if I go in, I'm like, hey, can I go look for deer antlers? And they're like, oh yeah, I don't care. And it seems like they're more open to. I might push the bow hunting at that point too.
In the same conversation before you go run wild. Okay.
Yep, absolutely. And now other times where I feel like I've hit a jackpot or something, and it's like, okay, this person really didn't. This person, I feel like I've gotten into a nice area that this person probably hasn't been asked a lot, doesn't care. and now I'm in. I won't ask to bow hunt then, but what I'll do is I'll go back, give them deer sticks, show my appreciation, ask them if they need help with anything, because I would do that regardless. But then that also builds more of that PR with the landowner. And that's where I start. And that's when I would open up the question to bow hunting. Mm-hmm. And like, so in 2021, I got permission on, I don't know exactly, but it's probably around 10 to 15 additional farms.
Wow.
I went back to ask to bow hunt 10 of them, and I got permission on 3 of them. So, that's okay though. Actually, one of the farms I got permission on to bow hunt this year was where I shot my bow buck this year. But it's just like, sometimes you can't expect that just because it's shed hunting, bow hunting isn't going to be a guaranteed. So that's why sometimes I just like to keep it at shed hunting and come back later for bow.
For sure. How do you stay positive knowing that when you're walking some of these farms that they've already been picked over? How do you just say like, forget it, I'm just going to go to a different farm? Like, what's your thought process there? Like, well, they could have missed something.
Oh, yeah.
Where do you draw the line?
I take more of a negative perspective on it. I'll start looking for footprints, and if I start seeing footprints in like off-beaten paths, not in the most obvious areas, I'll take it that somebody's hit it pretty thoroughly. And also, if I'm seeing footprints, it more likely indicates that they've been there pretty recently. I mean, if I'm seeing a lot of them and they're not worn away, and at that point, that's probably like it's time to move on to another farm. So if I'm seeing footprints everywhere, and not just on the easy to walk paths, or I'm seeing them everywhere, I'm moving on.
Yeah,
I guess it's a negative perspective.
Well, yeah, you got to optimize your time at the end of the day. Like, I feel picking over leftovers versus finding a fresh farm might be worth the extra effort.
But I'm fortunate that I've gained access to a wide variety of opportunities where I can do that. But if I was somebody who had, if this was 5 years ago or 6 years ago, where I only had a handful of farms to shed hunt, I would definitely be still covering that ground thoroughly. Mm-hmm. And it's so funny that we're having this conversation, because I'm about to release this video. I think it's uploading now. It's my 3rd video from this year. I find this massive shed, a big one, that I had to have missed last year, but it was on a farm that I actually titled the video last year. I titled the video of this farm Sloppy Seconds. So we got there was footprints everywhere, and I was like mad, and we did end up finding some sheds, but I was like still kind of frustrated because there was footprints everywhere. So we didn't cover it thoroughly. I go back this year, first shed I find on it is a big shed, and it's old, and it's like, oh my gosh, if I would have
if you would have went in there with a fresh set of eyes and positive attitude, you probably would have found it, it's hard to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. That's a good lesson. At least you found it. And so one question I have, how often do you lose permission year to year on shed hunting? We're like, well, Emmitt, it's great to have you last year, but we're actually going to let someone else shed hunt it this year. Or is it pretty much like you already have that established rapport and you're like, well, have at it. Good to see you. The spring's almost here. I see Emmitt, in my driveway.
Yes. I've been fortunate that I have not lost permission. The only times I've lost permission is if a landowner has sold their farm. Mm-hmm. I do, it brings up a great topic here of giving back to the landowners, because that's something that I have a high emphasis on after the shed season. It's being able to go back and, I basically go back and tell them, I'll paint your front porch. I'll do whatever you want, because you've given me, an opportunity to do something that I love to do. So please let me repay it to you. And I think a lot of landowners see how appreciative I am, and they see that I'm willing to do that. And it builds that rapport and it builds that PR with them to where they really aren't going to, I haven't had the situation where somebody's cut me off.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a credit to your ability to build a relationship with those people. I think it was,
sorry, I cut you off, but it really is something that a lot of people can't look look past, because that, I feel like if you don't do that, you don't build that relationship, it becomes easy for them to not only cut you off, but to situation where, hey, I've got permission here. If I can build a strong relationship with the landowner, they're going to be more likely to tell the next person that comes up to the door, no, I've got somebody else who does it. But if I'm just there once every year, they see my truck parked there, and that's all they know of me, they're probably going to be pretty apt to say, yes, you can,
that's good.
The next person that comes along, you can go too.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think that probably goes with just permission parcels too. And I think, I'm sure a landowner can sense your level of respect by making a point to go in and offer those type of services too. Where I think people are, I don't know, some people carry a higher level of entitlement than probably what they deserve in the irony of that statement. But okay, so this is something, you mentioned November 7th as like your peak rut date. What is your peak shed hunting day? Like, what is the November 7th in the world of shed hunting to you? Is it March 1st? Is it March 3rd?
Oh, today's February 22nd. I feel like that's changing every year in regards to where, if 5 years ago, I would say March 10th. 3 years ago, I would have said March 3rd. Now I'm starting to say February 28th, because it's just slowly moving back, because I feel like if you wait till March 10th, if I have my best farm or the best piece of ground that I'm excited about shed hunting, I'm now going to want to start hitting that on February 28th, because I'm that concerned that somebody else might beat me or trespass onto it.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of becomes my peak. It's not because I think all the deer have dropped. It's because the hobby's growing. Shed hunting is growing. And the more people that do it, the less places that are going to be that are fresh.
Yeah.
Whether it's because they have permission or they don't, people do trespass, and that's just the nature of it. And if I could wait till March 10th, that would be my November 7th.
Okay.
But
so March,
because there's
in a perfect utopia, it's March 10th, you said. And then if it's the reality of it is in terms of like going the earliest you can without everything being picked over, that's the 28th. That's interesting.
Absolutely.
How often? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say one trend that I don't have the data to speak to, but it really does seem like a lot of the big deer or more mature deer drop their antlers. I know that there's studies out there that show that the same deer is going to drop his antlers and within a certain time frame every year. From personal experience, I've seen specific situations that have, said otherwise. But one thing that I truly believe is that these bigger or more mature deer, they don't seem to have their antlers holding long into March. And so like if I'm going after a big setter, if I know that there's a big deer in the area, I'm typically not concerned about waiting till March 10th on that. I will if I can, but I'm more apt to go to that February 28th. It's a weird pattern I'm putting together, because it just seems like majority of the years, a lot of the big ones do drop early. But you'll have your outliers. Like I was shed hunting this past weekend, and I saw a really nice one holding both sides. But it just seems like a very, very, like I would say as far as 80 to 90% drop before February 21st.
So someone listening, I guess right now it's the 22nd as we record this. Like right now was big antler time. Like this is the sweet spot of finding big antlers before everything gets picked over.
Exactly. Like that set I found yesterday. I mean, wax rings or not wax rings, that gel ring that's around their pedicle, those were all worn off. I mean, they had been down for, chew marks were already on them and they were dropped this year. So I'd be venturing to bet that they were dropped, 4 weeks ago.
Wow. Dang. Yeah. Are those the ones on the bed right now?
Yeah.
Big ones?
Yeah. These ones. Yeah. I was going to say, because you text me like, hey, you better have some big antlers. I'm like,
those are some big ones right there.
So all my big ones are at my parents' house, or a good majority of them.
Yeah.
So it's like, I got to find some big ones for jig. But they're tree trunk bases. I mean, just
the pedicles on those things are huge. Wow. That's
and like if you look at this thing, it's like really flat. Like it just lays flat. You see that? So when it was laying on the ground, it just looked like an absolute, it is a massive antler, but it just looked unreal laying on the ground like that.
Yeah, those beams are kind of a unique shape. Like So this farm here, was this a permission parcel to go shed hunt, or is this a farm that you can hunt, or are you?
Yeah, this is a permission. Okay. Well, this is a place that I can shed hunt. I did get permission this year. I have not asked to bow hunt yet. Okay. I saw some tree stands while I was scouting this year. It's like, my chances might not be good on bow hunting, but I'll do whatever I can to, make that happen. Yeah. But it's the nature of it. If not, I'll be excited to go look after his antlers next year.
Yeah. I mean,
hopefully if he lives.
Yeah. It's a freaking giant. So here's a question for you. So how often have you ever found a match set and then went and killed the deer the next year? Or I guess how much is the shed hunting portion? Is it playing any impact into your hunting season, or is it not necessarily mutually exclusive?
Trying to think. I have not killed. I personally have not. I mean, I've been a part of like my dad's farm. I don't do a lot of hunting on my dad's farm personally. Like I'll film, but more or less my dad and my little brother do more of the hunting there. So like we'll have history and we'll have sheds off of deer that they've killed quite a few that we have a lot of sheds off of. But as where I could say personally that where I found a match set. No, I take that back. I killed Junior. There was a buck I called Junior, and we had 3 sheds off of him when I shot him.
Wow.
But it doesn't. I wouldn't say it plays much into a factor other than the idea that deer is just there.
So okay. So it's kind of shed hunting is hunting, and then your deer hunting is kind of your deer hunting. Because I think there's when we were on the same trip when we recorded with you for Whitetail Cribs, it was Scott Siebolt when we recorded with him, and it was a profound moment for me because he said like wherever you find a match set, like you have a really good chance of killing that deer in October the following year. Now every time I find a match set, I'm like, all right, like marking these pins, and this was only last year, and I haven't found a hammer set of match set of antlers. So. And that's what kind of brings me to that with those antlers you just found there. So I don't know. It was something that was very interesting to me, and he had a wall of deer to prove that this worked. So I definitely tuned in and listened on what his suggestion was. So okay.
No, I strongly believe it. I think it's just like with situations like this, it's like I'm gonna totally do my best to get permission to bow hunt, but just the nature of it is I'm likely not. Like I said last year, 70% of the places I got permission to shed hunt, I didn't get permission to bow hunt as well. So I'm going to keep my hopes high. I'm going to do everything I can, but like, I would love to test that theory. Totally would love to test that theory. I think it's a very valid statement. I mean, the deer obviously lives there. He's comfortable there. Mm-hmm. You're not going to tell me that. I would be willing to bet that 99% of the deer that, drop their sheds in a certain area are going to venture off into that area at some point in October or November the next year, whether it's only for a day at night or whatever it is. I mean, otherwise, I think that there's some situations where you'll have bucks that will drop their sheds right in in their core. And yes, you could go in there, the very next summer and you'd have pictures of them from then until winter.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. It's like one little clue to trying to figure out the rest of the story. So how many sheds are you at already for 2022? Do you know offhand?
I just tallied it up today. I was at 51.
51. So you've already surpassed 2020, the bad year.
We're tied at it. So fingers crossed that we can pass that before the end of the year.
Do you have a goal? Is it to beat 143, or is it just to meet 143, or is it wherever the cards fall you'll be okay with?
I was thinking about making the goal 125 this year, but I was going to be conservative and say 100 again, just because I think last year was a really, really good year. There were some factors in there last year that might have played to. We had a really hard winter last year. What happened is all the crop fields, we had some freezing rain and then a lot of snow, and basically for a good majority of January and February, the ground was frozen solid, so the deer had to resort to other food sources. And so I had a lot of farms last year that I could shed hunt that had good thermal cover. So during our hard winter, those deer had, the type of bedding that they want, but also those locust pods, those food sources that they could resort to in a winter like last year. And so I think that those types of external circumstances played to my benefit. And I'm not confident enough to say that I can beat that again this year based on the winter that we're having. And
Sure.
I hope I can. I mean, I really hope that we can. That'd be awesome. And I'll set my goal higher if that becomes the case. But I think last year could have been like more of an outlier for the hive.
You're well off you're over halfway to 100. And then next week, we're actually going to be able to spend a day together. Cameron will be along and we're going to go do some shed hunting, which I'm really excited about. And then actually the next day we're going to be down with Scott Buckley to shed hunt with him for a day. So we're going to get 2 really fun days of shed hunting, and then it'll be at the Iowa Deer Classic. But I'll give you an opportunity to plug everything that where people can find you and follow along on your shed hunting adventures. And then I'll let you get back to your evening.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it, Jake. So this time of year, doing a lot of things on YouTube. My account is Extreme Element Outdoors. I try to post a lot of videos when I can. I take a lot of time to put them together. So I'd say I update at least one a month, but for shed hunting season, I mean, I'm doing it weekly. And then you can also find me on social media for Facebook and Instagram, and the account is Extreme Element Outdoors.
Yeah. And then if you haven't done so, go watch his Whitetail Cribs too, because you get to see
absolutely
the shrine of antlers and big bucks there. It was a really fun episode.
And I hope that we could do that again here in about 5 years and see if if I can build another pile.
There's an open invite. So whenever you're ready, you just give us a shout.
Oh, you guys are always welcome. I really hope that we can, I look forward to next week. I think that we'll have some fun. And
yeah, if not, it's just good to get outside and get some fresh air and check out some new ground. And, if we scoop up 4 or 5 antlers, that's a good day. Or if we scoop up more.
That's a win.
For sure. All right. Well, and until next time, make sure you go check out his Whitetail Cribs and the rest of his content. And good luck the rest of the season.